Do you ever get that feeling? Like the traditional steps of life, school, then work, marriage, kids, it all feels less like a rigid staircase these days, more like a winding path, maybe unpredictable. It's something a lot of us seem to notice, right, in our own lives, our friends.
Absolutely. That popular narrative is definitely out there. The idea that the old blueprint is fading.
Yeah.
More flexibility, maybe, but also...
Or uncertainty.
Exactly. But is that just a feeling, just anecdotes piled up? Or is there actually solid data behind it?
Right, and that's what we're diving into today. We're looking at the life course. Specifically, this idea, is it really becoming de-standardized?
Yeah.
This isn't just about what feels different. We want to look at how the big things, education, work, starting a family, how those patterns have actually shifted across generations.
Using real research, not just hunches.
Precisely. It's about the how and the why and what it all means for you navigating your own life today.
And to help us figure this out, we're leaning heavily on some really rigorous academic work. It's a key chapter from a book called The Structure of the Life Course. Standardized, Individualized, Differentiated.
Yeah.
Came out back in 2005.
Okay.
The authors, Hannah Brückner and Karl Ulrich, they're major figures in this area. And they didn't just theorize, they dug deep into data from the German life history study.
Ah, so real-world data.
Oh yeah, a huge amount of it.
Yeah.
Tracking people's lives over decades, quite a resource.
So what's our mission here, then?
Well, our mission is to unpack what Brückner and Mayer actually found, to get beyond the sort of popular buzzwords and understand the concepts they lay out really clearly.
Like de-standardization itself.
Exactly. We want to see what the German data truly tells us about life paths becoming more diverse, less uniform. And, think about what that might mean for you, for your journey, and maybe for society as a whole.
It's about seeing the bigger patterns.
Right. And finding out if the reality is maybe a bit more nuanced than the headlines often suggest.
Okay, let's unpack this. Are our lives really less predictable? Let's start with the basics. When sociologists talk about the life course, what do they actually mean? Why study this?
Right. So at its heart, the life course is about, it's about the typical sequence and the timing of major life events. Think of it like a kind of social script.
A script for life.
Sort of. When you finish school, get that first job, marry, have kids, retire, it's not just what happens, but when it happens, the order it happens in, and crucially, how common that pattern is for people like you in your generation, in your society.
So it changes over time.
Massively. That's why researchers study it. These patterns evolve, reflecting huge societal shifts. We're looking for those big society-level changes in these life blueprints.
Okay, so it's the expected rhythm of life. And the big idea we're tackling is this de-standardization hypothesis. What's that all about? What's the popular take on it?
Yeah, the de-standardization hypothesis is basically the widespread idea, the perception, that lives in modern societies, places like Germany or the US or the UK, have become less predictable.
Less set in stone.
Exactly. Less collectively determined, maybe less stable, less orderly, but also more flexible and definitely more individualized. It's the notion that the traditional script, that clear path you mentioned, has kind of blurred or faded.
And you see examples everywhere, right?
Oh, absolutely. People point to things like private lives. Instead of just marriage, then kids, now you see non-marital unions, people having kids outside marriage, divorce, remarriage, diverse living arrangements, delaying families. It seems much more pluralized.
And work, too. People talk about jobs being less stable.
Right. The job for life idea seems long gone. More hopping between companies, maybe even changing careers more often. That's the perception.
Education seems longer, too.
Yeah, education and training. People see it as more extended, maybe more intermittent, not just a block you finish before starting work. And some even talk about non-standard labor contracts, like gig work or short-term projects replacing stable employment.
It sounds like the exact opposite of things being predictable.
It does. And it's a real contrast to an earlier idea, which was called the standardization thesis. And this might sound strange now, but that theory suggested that back in, say, the mid-20th century, lives were actually becoming more uniform, more structured by big institutions.
More standard, really.
Yeah. So it's been quite a swing in thinking, from standardization to this idea of de-standardization.
That's fascinating, a complete reversal in how we think about life paths. Where did these ideas originate? What made people think things were standardizing? And then what shifted to make them think the opposite?
That's a great question because it wasn't just a sudden flip. Brückner and Mayer traced this whole debate through three different historical contexts, or sort of phases of thinking. Understanding this helps see why we're talking about destandardization now.
Okay, so what was the first phase?
First, you have the era they call modernization, roughly the 1970s into the early 80s. Back then, the dominant view was that lives were getting more institutionalized, more predictable.
Why? What was going on?
Well, think about the post-war boom. Economies were growing. Secondary and university education expanded massively, creating what seemed like clear paths into careers.
Go to school, get your diploma, get a good job.
Pretty much. And you had big companies, strong unions, fostering the idea of a career, stable jobs, climbing the ladder within one place. The job for life felt real for many.
And the government played a role.
Huge role. The welfare state was expanding things like sick pay, maternity leave, unemployment benefits. They provided a safety net, buffered income loss, made life feel more secure.
Which probably helped families.
Absolutely. Economic security supported earlier marriage, bigger families. And there was even research back then, like a famous study by Model, Furstenberg, and Hirschberg in '76, that looked at historical data and found that the transition to adulthood, finishing school, leaving home, marrying, was actually becoming more universal, happening at more similar ages, less variation.
So the evidence seemed to point towards more standardization back then.
Exactly. The prevailing idea was lives are becoming more uniform, more normal in sequence and timing. The era of the standard path.
Okay, so that was the view then. But clearly something changed. What started making people question that standardization narrative?
Well, then comes the next phase, the period of counter-observations tied to the rise of post-industrialism, starting around the late 1980s. This is when the narrative starts to shift. Observations just didn't seem to fit the standardization idea anymore.
What kinds of observations?
For one, big value changes were happening. Think about the emphasis on individualism, autonomy, self-realization, maybe fueled by youth movements. This started showing up in private lives.
How so?
People started delaying marriage, delaying having kids. Non-marital unions became more common. Divorce rates rose. People were maybe leaving home earlier, not necessarily waiting for marriage. It was like a cultural shift playing out in personal decisions.
And professionally, did things change there too?
Yes, that educational expansion, which first seemed standardizing, started having other effects.
Right.
Credential inflation became a thing.
Meaning degrees were worth less.
Kind of. So many people had degrees, you needed more or better ones to stand out. This actually started delaying people getting into the labor market or making it harder. Some academics even called universities waiting halls, places people stayed because good jobs weren't immediately there.
Stuck in education.
In a way. Plus, the women's movement was a huge factor, encouraging women to pursue education, careers, often separate from family timelines. That really shook up traditional gender roles in a life course.
And the economy.
Big impact. The fallout from the 1973 oil shock really hit the job market for young people in the 80s. Getting training, finding stable work became harder, more complicated. All this led to new ways of thinking concepts like the postponed generation or patchwork biographies. Life paths started to seem more fragmented.
So culture, economics, social movements, all pushing towards less predictability. And then you mentioned globalization. How did that fit in?
Right. The third phase they identify is linked to globalization, kicking off in the early 1990s. This brought this widespread feeling, maybe fear, of increased global competition, leading to things like labor market deregulation, worries about structural unemployment.
So more pressure on jobs.
That was a perception. And those pathways that seemed like new options in the 80s, maybe more flexibility, started being reinterpreted. Now they looked more like difficult adjustments people were forced to make due to external pressures. Not choice, but constraint.
That's a darker view.
It was. There was that brief optimistic blip with the dot-com boom in the late 90s, which seemed to celebrate unconventional careers, but that didn't last.
And what about those safety nets you mentioned earlier?
They started looking less sturdy. Throughout the 90s, many countries saw reforms or cuts to Social Security, unemployment benefits, pensions. People felt more exposed to risks, job loss, family changes.
Less security.
Definitely. So the overall takeaway, looking back at this history, is that maybe that period of stable jobs, predictable careers, strong welfare states, early marriages, stable families, that golden age was actually quite short. Maybe an exceptional period, not the historical norm.
So maybe the current feeling of unpredictability isn't entirely new, but a return to a different kind of normal.
That's one way to look at it. But the key point the authors make is that these are still broad narratives. To really understand what's happening, we need precision. We need clear concepts and solid data, not just sweeping generalizations.
Okay, so let's get precise. They identify several key terms that often get jumbled together. Let's break them down. What's the first one?
The first distinction is between institutionalization and de-institutionalization. Institutionalization is basically about the rules, the formal norms, laws, or organizational structures that define how life is organized socially and temporally.
Like setting a retirement age or mandatory school years.
Exactly. Or the legal definition of marriage. It means certain stages or events are clearly marked out by society with clear expectations.
So deinstitutionalization is when those rules get weaker or fuzzier.
Precisely. It's when states or transitions that used to be clearly separate start to blend together or become less formally defined. Think about education and work becoming simultaneous activities for many people in the U.S. studying part-time while working or going back to school mid-career.
That sounds like a blurring of stages.
It is. Or think about non-marital unions, where setting up a home together isn't necessarily tied to getting married anymore. That link has been de-institutionalized for many.
Okay.
But here's a nuance. De-institutionalizing one thing, like marriage being the only way to form a household, doesn't mean total chaos. If a new sequence becomes common, like living together then getting married, that actually adds a stage. It makes the sequence more differentiated even as marriage itself seems less rigidly defined.
Ah, so it can get more complex, not just dissolve.
Exactly. It's not always just things falling apart. Sometimes it's new patterns emerging.
Got it. What's the next pair of terms?
Standardization versus de-standardization. This is really about uniformity. Standardization means specific events or sequences become more universal or happen at more similar times for everyone.
Like everyone retiring at 65.
Perfect example. Or everyone getting married between 25 and 30. High standardization.
So destandardization is the opposite, more variety.
Right. It means fewer people follow that specific pattern, or the timing becomes much more spread out. Marriage and parenthood are classic examples here. The author suggests they became more standardized up to the 70s, then became much less standardized, with people marrying and having kids across a much wider age range.
So less of a peak age, more spread out.
Exactly. Or think about fuzzy retirement ages now, or maybe those less defined stopgap jobs people take when starting out. That's de-standardization in action, less uniformity in timing and type.
Okay, that makes sense. Then there's differentiation versus de-differentiation. How is that different from standardization?
Good question. Differentiation is about the number of distinct stages or states in a life course increasing. Think about early life. It used to be just childhood, then work, maybe. Now you have preschool, kindergarten, elementary, middle, high school, college, maybe grad school. More distinct phases.
More boxes on the timeline.
Precisely. Or in work life, if people switch jobs or even careers more often, their work life becomes more differentiated. More distinct employer or role stages compared to someone who stayed with one company.
And de-differentiation.
Would be the opposite stages merging. But the authors note it's actually hard to find clear examples. It seems once we create these new distinctions or stages in life, they tend to stick around. Differentiation might be a largely one-way street.
Interesting. Okay, next, pluralization versus homogenization. This sounds like diversity again.
It is, but it's specifically about the synchronous diversity. How many different forms of something exist at the same time in a population, or even for one person?
Like different family types.
Exactly. The rise of non-marital unions, single parents, people living alone alongside traditional families, that's pluralization of family forms. Many types coexist. Or for an individual, maybe holding multiple part-time jobs instead of one full-time job. Homogenization would be the opposite, if everyone started converging towards fewer forms.
Got it. And the last big one, individualization. We hear that word a lot.
We do, and it's maybe the most interpretive concept. It generally means individuals having more control over their lives, pursuing more unique life paths, writing their own scripts.
The positive spin, more freedom, more choice.
That's one side.
Yeah.
But the authors point out there's also this idea of involuntary individualization, where maybe you're not choosing a unique path, but you're kind of forced onto one because the traditional paths aren't available or viable anymore.
Like you have to figure it out yourself because the map is gone.
Something like that. It's not necessarily empowerment. It could be dealing with increased risks or lack of structure. So it's a concept with two sides.
That's a really important distinction. So freedom versus being forced to be unique.
And the crucial takeaway from all these definitions is that these dimensions, institutionalization, standardization, differentiation, pluralization, individualization, they aren't all the same thing. They can change independently.
Right. You could have, say, more differentiation, but also more standardization in one area.
Absolutely. Which is why just saying life is de-standardized is too simple. We need to look at which dimensions are changing, in which life domains, and how. And that requires real data, not just anecdotes.
Okay, these concepts give us a much sharper lens. So, armed with this framework, what did the German life history study actually find? Let's get into the data.
Right. Let's look at the evidence from West Germany, comparing cohorts born from 1919 all the way to 1971. That covers a huge swath of 20th century history.
And they start with the school training work nexus, education and getting into jobs.
Yes, and the first big finding, confirming what many observe, is that education and training transitions are definitely getting delayed. The median age people left school went up significantly. For men, from about 14 for the 1920 cohort to over 17 for the 1971 cohort, women saw a similar rise. People are just staying in school longer, pursuing higher levels of education, that's clear.
And finishing training, like apprenticeships or degrees.
Even more dramatic changes there. For men, the median age they completed training jumped from around 19 for the 1920 cohort to nearly 25 for the 1955 cohort. That's a huge leap, almost 6 years later.
Wow. Why such a big jump around the 1955 cohort?
That cohort hit the difficult job market of the 70s and 80s. The delay reflects that pressure. For women, the rise was more gradual but still significant, from about 18 to almost 22 by the 1971 cohort.
So people are definitely in the education training system for longer. But is it just longer or is it also more complicated? You mentioned that waiting hall idea.
Exactly. It's not just longer, it's become more differentiated, more complex, particularly for men born around 1955 and 1960. Over half started more than 2 separate training episodes.
Going back for more training?
Yes, or starting one, starting another. Compare that to less than a third for earlier cohorts. The number doing 3 or more episodes was 5 times higher for the 1955 cohort than the 1921.
That sounds like a lot more back and forth.
It is. It suggests people were spending more time in the educational system, maybe strategically because the job market was tough. The waiting hall for the postponed generation.
Yeah, and women.
Similar trend towards multiple spells becoming more common for later cohorts. But the biggest change for women was the huge decline in those never completing any training from over half in early cohorts down to just 13% recently. So training became almost universal for women.
And men and women's paths started looking more similar.
Very much so in education. By the 1955 cohort, those big gender gaps in how much training people got and whether they completed multiple spells had largely disappeared. A real convergence or homogenization there.
Okay, so education. Longer, more complex, more stops and starts, and more similar for men and women. What about actually getting that first job? Does that just happen later too?
Here's where it gets interesting. Despite education taking longer, the median age people started their first job actually stayed relatively stable.
Really? How does that work?
For men, it hovered between 18 and 20 across the cohorts.
Yeah.
For women, it rose a bit, but also stayed around 17 to 20. And for the youngest cohorts, the gender difference in starting age vanished. Men and women enter the labor market around the same age.
But if training finishes later, how are they starting work earlier than they finish training?
That's the key finding. For men, the median age of the first job was consistently younger than the median age they finished training, and that gap widened over time.
Meaning?
Meaning people are increasingly starting work before they finish all their training, or they're leaving work to go back into training. The sequence isn't just school training work anymore. It's becoming fuzzier.
More weaving back and forth.
Exactly. It's a kind of de-standardization of the sequence. The clear one-way street is less common.
That definitely challenges the simple everything is just delayed idea. So once people are in the workforce, are they hopping between jobs more? Is that perception accurate?
Well, the data here is quite nuanced. If you just look at the average number of jobs someone held by age 27, it's surprisingly stable across most cohorts.
So people aren't necessarily having tons more jobs overall by that age?
Not dramatically more, no. Around 2 or 3 jobs on average for both men and women by age 27. The total quantity didn't skyrocket.
That must be a but.
The but is when you look at the rate of job changes, how many jobs per year spent in the labor force. Because people are entering work maybe a bit later or spending time back in education, that same number of jobs gets packed into a shorter working period.
So more changes in less time.
Exactly. For cohorts born after 1950, the frequency of job shifts per year clearly increases. For men born in 1971, the rate actually doubled compared to earlier cohorts. More job changes crammed into their active working years up to age 27.
So not necessarily more jobs total, but faster turnover, more instability within the work period.
That seems to be the picture. Faster churning. And this fits with other findings about recent cohorts facing higher risks of involuntary job loss or downward wage mobility. It suggests a less stable experience of employment, even if the total job count isn't vastly different by a certain age.
That's a really important distinction. It's about the pace and security, not just the raw number. Okay, let's switch gears to family and household formation. This feels like the area where many of us sense the biggest changes. Is the data clearer here?
Yes, I think the data on family and private life aligns much more closely with that popular perception of de-standardization. The changes are pretty stark.
Like leaving home.
Interestingly, leaving home actually happened a bit earlier for younger cohorts, moving from late 20s down to early 20s on average. And the variation decreased for a while, then ticked up slightly. So that initial step towards independence got a bit earlier and, for a time, more standard.
But marriage is different.
Very different. First marriage timing shows clear de-standardization. For men, it was late for the 1920 cohort, almost 28, got earlier, then shot up again for cohorts born 1955 and later, heading towards 30.
And fewer people marrying young.
Dramatically fewer. Only 17% of men born in 1971 were married by age 27. Compare that to 64% of the 1940 cohort.
Wow, that's a huge drop.
Massive. Women show a similar pattern, marrying a bit younger but still delaying significantly, and with far fewer married by their late 20s compared to mid-century cohorts.
And does the data show that visually, like less of a peak age?
Absolutely. The graphs in the study are really telling. For women born around 1940 or 1950, you see this sharp peak, lots of people getting married around the same age, highly age-structured, very standardized.
Right.
But for the younger cohorts, born 1955 onwards, those curves just flatten right out.
Right.
It looks more like a plateau. Marriage is happening across a much wider age range, much more varied, much less predictable timing. That's de-standardization you can literally see.
So if marriage timing is spreading out like that, what does it imply for the idea of a standard family path? Is that just gone?
It certainly suggests that the notion of one standard path is becoming obsolete. Maybe it was only ever true for a specific period. And we see this even more clearly with first childbirth.
Even more spread out than marriage.
Even more so. Again, the 1940 cohort shows the clearest peak age for having a first child, for both men and women. But for the younger cohorts, the timing is incredibly dispersed. The curves are really flat, indicating huge variation in when people start families.
Can you give us a picture of that?
Yeah, imagine like a kindergarten playground in the 1960s. The parents there would likely be in a pretty narrow age band, maybe mostly late 20s, early 30s.
Right, contemporaries.
Now picture that same playground in the mid-1990s or today. You'd see parents ranging from their early 20s right up to their 40s. That visual difference reflects this massive de-standardization in the timing of parenthood.
And does this link back to that idea of decoupling events?
Directly. The authors stress this increasing decoupling between workation and family formation. Forming your own household isn't necessarily tied to getting married anymore. Having a stable career isn't necessarily a prerequisite for having kids in the way it might have been perceived before.
So the sequence is breaking down.
Yeah.
Job, marriage, yes, house, kids.
That neat sequence is definitely less dominant. People are mixing and matching, sequencing events differently. This gives more flexibility, sure, but it also means those clear, institutionally supported pathways are less common.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground education, work, family. If we pull it all together, what's the big picture? Where did Brückner and Mayer find real de-standardization, and where did things look more stable, maybe surprisingly so?
Right, the synthesis is crucial. They find very clear, substantial evidence for de-standardization, but primarily concentrated in the sphere of private lives, especially family formation.
Marriage, kids.
Exactly. That's where you see age concentration really giving way to much greater variation in timing. Delay, wider age ranges, more diverse forms like cohabitation, it's all happening there. And they link this to long-term trends like educational expansion, value changes since the 70s, and the impact of the women's movement.
But what about work and education? Less change there.
This is the key counterintuitive finding. They find little support for a generalized de-standardization in education, training, and work.
Despite education getting longer and more complex.
Yes. While those transitions are prolonged and definitely more differentiated, like those multiple training spells, the fuzzier work school sequences, The overall stability and age variation for things like starting work is surprisingly high over the long term.
So the pathways are maybe more winding, but not necessarily completely chaotic or unpredictable in their overall timing.
That seems to be the gist. It's a more complex, extended pathway, but maybe not a totally shattered one, at least based on this German data up to the early 70s cohorts.
What about gender? Did that play a big role in the findings?
Huge. Two key points on gender. First, that strong gender convergence in education and work. Men's and women's paths became much more similar, a kind of homogenization.
Right.
But second, family formation remains the area where gender differences really persist, even if both men and women are delaying things. Women still tend to start families earlier.
And did specific time periods matter more than just a smooth trend?
Definitely. They emphasize strong period effects. It wasn't just a straight line towards de-standardization. You see bumps caused by history, the disruptions for the WWII cohorts, the specific pressures on the 1955 cohort hitting that tough job market. These specific events explain a lot of the variation, maybe more than some overarching trend. Even the increased job mobility for the 1971 cohort looks like potentially a period effect rather than proof of continuous de-standardization in work across the board.
That's really important. History matters, specific events matter. And you mentioned this is West German data. How much can we generalize? Is Germany unique?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the authors are careful here. They explicitly say Germany's specific institutions, like its strong vocational training system, its structured labor market, might well shape life courses differently than in, say, the US or UK, with more flexible markets.
So the German system might resist de-standardization in work more.
It's plausible. Those institutions might provide more structure. So while the findings are incredibly valuable for understanding Germany, we need to be cautious about assuming the exact same patterns apply everywhere else. Context is key.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, what does this mean for you, the listener, trying to make sense of your own life path today? How does this research help?
Well, I think it helps put personal experience in context. If you feel like your life, especially around family, isn't following some old script, maybe you're delaying marriage, not having kids yet, living differently, the data says, yeah, that's actually becoming the norm in a statistical sense. De-standardization is real in that area. You're not an outlier. You're part of a major societal shift.
So it validates that feeling of difference.
It does. And it highlights the flexibility that comes with it. The decoupling means more choice in how you sequence things. But it also flags the potential downside. Less clear paths might mean less built-in support.
Like those friend networks you mentioned.
Exactly. The authors raise this really interesting point about support networks. If older generations experienced major life events, marriage, kids, buying a house more synchronously, their friendships might have been naturally built around navigating those shared stages together.
Everyone's in the same boat at the same time.
Right. But if you're a younger cohort, your friends are likely all over the map in terms of life stages. Some married, some single, some with kids, some focused on careers, some still studying. That diversity is great, but it might mean providing and receiving support requires more conscious effort because that automatic synchronicity isn't there.
That's a really practical takeaway. We need to be more intentional about supporting each other through diverse paths.
It suggests that, yes,
Okay, so the big picture seems to be our personal and family lives, definitely more diverse, less predictable. But the structures around education and work, they're adapting, becoming more complex and extended, but showing more stability than we might think, at least in this German context. It's a nuanced evolution, not a total breakdown.
precisely. And that leads to a final thought, maybe something for you to ponder.
Yeah.
If life courses used to have more of those shared synchronous experiences, everyone hitting milestones around the same time, what does it fundamentally mean for society when those collective rhythms become rarer? How does that lack of widespread synchronicity change our sense of community, our social support systems, even just our basic expectations for our own lives and how they relate to others?
When the shared beats fade away, what replaces them? Something profound to think about as you navigate your own unique deep dive through life. We'll be back soon for another deep dive into the sources you share.